ways we practice spiritual as well as physical wellness when we remember the words and actions of those people who fought against racism, sexism, homophobia, and class privilege. Black health and wellness is wonderfully exemplified in the figures we are celebrating today. Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Bishop Pauline Murray. These are two of the most dynamic warriors for justice and advocates of Black wellness.
Good day, church. Yeah. So the song that we all sang just now has its origin in South Africa. And as you know, in South Africa, the local people, or the majority South African, the Black nation, was opposing apartheid. And it was a struggle. So they needed, basically it's a culture that sings and that marches, as you probably have seen. And so they needed a song to inspire them. This song is sung in Zulu and was composed by a pastor who felt that as they sang and danced, they would be inspired by Jehovah. So basically, when they were out on the streets, or they saw the police forces or the apartheid forces moving towards them, they burst into these kinds of songs. And it gave them the inner strength and the spiritual strength to face the situation. Thank you very much for joining in with us.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Anglican bishop, theologian, human rights activist, husband, and father, became Archbishop of Cape Town in 1986, the highest position in the South African Anglican hierarchy. He's remembered as a courageous and outstanding anti-apartheid crusader during the struggle against the apartheid system and white minority racist government. When Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, the two of them led negotiations to end apartheid and introduce a multiracial democracy in South Africa. For Tutu, Black theology was the spiritual underpinning for his political activism, religious and moral authority in his struggle, and agitation for racial equality and social justice in South Africa.
Black theology seems to make sense of the life experience of the Black person, which is largely black suffering at the hands of rampant white racism. And to understand this in the light of what God has said about being human, black theology is to be concerned about our humanization, because those who ravage our humanity dehumanize themselves in the process. Black theology says that the liberation of the black person is the other side of the liberation of the white person.
In the African worldview, there is something called Ubuntu. In order to heal the people from the wounds of apartheid, Tutu helped South Africans recognize Ubuntu, the concept deeply embedded in their culture, that is, the ways in which they are interconnected.
Ubuntu is the essence of being human. We need other human beings in order to be human. The completely self-sufficient human being is subhuman. Those who had Ubuntu were compassionate and gentle. They used their strength on behalf of the weak, and they did not take advantage of others. In short, they cared, treating others as what they were, human beings. If you lacked Ubuntu, in a sense you lacked an indispensable ingredient of being human.
Archbishop Tutu believed in another kind of justice, a restorative justice, which is concerned not so much with punishment as with correcting imbalances, restoring broken relationships with healing, harmony, and reconciliation.
We have had an age-old jurisprudence in South Africa, and in all of Africa, that was not retributive but restorative. Traditionally, when people quarreled, the main intention was not to punish the miscreant, but to restore good relations. Africa has been traditionally concerned about the wholeness of relationships. That is something we need in this world, a world that is polarized, that is fragmented, a world that destroys people. It is also something that we need in our families and our relationships. For retribution wounds and divides one another. Only restoration can heal us and make us whole. And only forgiveness enables us to restore trust and compassion to our relationships.
The Reverend Dr. Anna Pauline Polly Murray, also known as Polly Murray, was a lawyer, a professor, a poet, a feminist, a civil rights activist, a women's rights activist, and the first African-American woman to be ordained an Episcopal priest. She was born in Baltimore in 1910, the fourth of 6 children, and orphaned at 3 years of age. She was raised by her aunts and grandparents, who quickly discovered that she was brilliant.
By the age of 16, Pauline was already enrolled in college, but she was also engaged in civil rights protests. In 1940, 15 years before Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King started the Montgomery bus boycott, she and a friend were riding a Greyhound bus in the Commonwealth of Virginia and were arrested because they refused to give up their seats to white people. At the Petersburg City Prison, there was, however, a surprising turn of events.
After we confronted the racist guards protesting their treatment of black prisoners, the most perplexing problem we faced in prison was with the black males. They were amusing themselves by using a small mirror so that they could observe the women 24/7. They kept up a steady flow of obscene comments about sex, and referred to us as those New York whores.
We decided to compose a polite memorandum to them, giving an account of our arrest and stressing the injustice of racial segregation. As they circulated our memo, their jeering comments stopped. The men sent back notes to us, apologizing for their behavior and expressing sympathy for us and asking us to help them. Eventually, all the Black prisoners, men and women, began to discuss the need for solidarity in the struggle for racial emancipation.
In 1941, Murray decided to enroll in Howard Law School, where she began to do a study of all the segregation laws in the U.S. 10 years later, Murray's Howard professors became the lead lawyers in the Brown v. Board of Education decision that struck down legal segregation in the U.S. It is not widely known that these Howard professors used Murray's student papers to form the basis of their Brown decision.
As a third-year law student at Howard, I set out to discover legal grounds for overturning segregation. I researched all the state laws that supported segregation. I said that there was nothing equal and separate but equal. In the paper I wrote for my law class, I argued that segregation did violence to the personality of the individual affected, whether white or Black.
Little did I know that 10 years later, my argument would become the basis for Brown versus Board of Education decision. None of those lawyers ever acknowledged that they based their arguments on the paper of a third-year female law student. I entered law school preoccupied with the racial struggle, but I graduated as an abashed feminist as well.
Murray graduated from Howard Law School, first in her class. But when she applied to Harvard Law School for a master's degree, Harvard wrote back to her, "You are not of the sex entitled to be admitted to Harvard Law School." She wrote back to them.
I had heard the rumor that Harvard Law School was opening up to women, and so I wrote to them requesting a letter of application. Their refusal to admit me was personally hurtful, but also a matter of justice. I wrote them back to say I would gladly change my sex to meet your requirements. But since the way to change my sex has not been revealed to me, I have no recourse but to appeal to you to change your minds.
Pauline Murray wrote about and struggled over her gender identity and sexuality throughout her life. She often wore pants rather than the customary skirts and dresses for women. And she was open about her relationships with women. In her journals, she wondered if she was only one of nature's experiments, a girl who should have been a boy. Partially because of this struggle, Murray suffered breakdowns and was hospitalized throughout her 20s and 30s. She became an outspoken advocate for the rights of the LGBTQ community. After years of political activism, Murray decided that her concerns over racial, gender, and sexual equality could best be expressed on a spiritual level. A lifelong member of the Episcopal Church, she enrolled in Yale Divinity School in 1971.
I faced an uncertain future as a woman in the church. I was 63 years old in 1971, and I had to give up my financial security as a tenured academic to attend Yale Divinity School. I knew that there was significant opposition to women's ordination, and I knew that women's seminarians in a community designed for men were the targets of much hostility. Plus, I was also the only Black woman enrolled. On a cold day in January 1977, 6 years after I began this journey to the priesthood, in front of 3,000 people at the Washington National Cathedral, we 6 women declared our vows and were consecrated priests forever in the order of Melchizedek.
Imagine this, a descendant of slaves. I was now empowered to administer the sacrament of one in whom there is no north or south, no black or white, no male or female, no gay or straight, only the spirit of love and reconciliation, drawing us all towards the goal of human wholeness.
Usually the Episcopalians wait until 50 years after a person has died before granting sainthood. But for Murray, the Church made an exception and fast-tracked her on the road to sainthood. In 2018, she was made a permanent part of the Episcopal Church's calendar of saints and is commemorated as a saint on July 1st.